In this tutorial, we're going to have a look at how to optimize transparent graphics in Adobe Photoshop CS 5.1. So first of all, we can ask the question, what is transparency? So we're working with the file here, transport1.psd, and essentially transparent graphics allow you to see what's behind the image and place the graphics on top of other images. They tend to be non-rectangular shapes, so the reason you might want to use a transparent graphic is because it's an irregular shape and you want to place that on top of something else. So it can be very useful to create sort of collage or layered effects and place various images on top of different types of backgrounds. So if we zoom in on the image we're looking at here, the surfboard, we can see that the edge pixels contain varying levels of transparency, and the reason for this is so that they can blend into the background. This is known as anti-aliasing, and you've got different levels of transparency around the edge of the image to make it blend. If we go into the Save for Web dialog box and just select JPEG from the drop-down menu on the right of the screen, you will see that JPEG, as we already have looked at, does not support any form of transparency at all. So any transparency that's in the Photoshop file becomes a solid white color as a background. GIFs and PNGs both support transparency. However, GIFs and PNG 8s only support one level or one bit of transparency, so they are far from ideal for trying to get smooth edges on the edge of your images. PNG 24, on the other hand, is the perfect candidate for full transparency, but the only two drawbacks are that PNG 24 creates much larger file sizes than either JPEGs or GIFs, substantially larger, and also there can be some issues in certain earlier um, browser versions like Internet Explorer 5, for example. So you just need to be aware, although they're not that much in use anymore. Okay, on to the next part, and we're going to look at how to work with solid backgrounds. So if you've got a solid background color in your web page and you want to put a transparent image over this color, you could do that in a number of different ways. We're going to look at how to do it using the GIF file format. So if we go to Save for Web and select GIF from the drop-down menu on the right, we can notice that in comparison to the original Photoshop file on the left, if you're in 2-up view here, um, the GIF on the right creates very jagged edges around our object, which again is not ideal. It looks quite unsightly. So if we click on the fill box on the toolbar on the left and use, this is the eyedropper color, and we're going to just select a sort of a light cyan color just to use as our background image. And then once you've selected the cyan color, go over to the flyout menu on the right of the Save for Web window and open the Edit for Output and Background Settings drop-down menu. Select Image and then use the eyedropper color for the background color. This is going to create a preview of what the web page would look like if the eyedropper color was the background color, and we can also see what our image would look like against that background. So if we click preview back in the Save for Web window, we'll see what the transparent image looks like against this color background. We can clearly see that the edges are still very jagged, not what we're looking for here. So go back to Save for Web, and the way to deal with this with a GIF file is to use the matte option on the right side of the properties. So if we go to the matte slider and from the drop down menu choose the eyedropper color, it's going to be the same as the background color we've selected, and as soon as you select it you'll see that around the edges of the GIF image become a certain outline which is the same color as the background image, which means that essentially it's going to blend into the background image, which is what we're looking for here. It's a trick that Photoshop can use to get rid of those jagged edges for us. So go back to Save for Web and save the image and the HTML file, and then open the folder on your desktop to preview the file in your browser and see how this looks. And we can see that it looks pretty good. This is kind of the idea of what we're looking for here. The next thing we look at is trying to save a transparent image against a patterned background. Slightly different. The first one was just a solid block color. Now we're talking about a patterned background. So we're going to be working with the Transboard 2 file, the tin background file, and the thick background file here. So make sure you have these open and go to the flyout menu and select background. Then select the tin background GIF as your background image. So when we preview this, it's going to show us a preview of the thin background image as a repeated pattern tile background in our browser window. So click on the preview button just to see what this looks like, and then go back to Save for Web, and we're going to choose matte and foreground this time. So just make sure that the foreground color is the same as the background color in the thin background image, that shade of cyan that we talked about. Then go back to your flyout menu, click on Edit Output Settings, choose Background, and then Image Path, and you're going to choose the thick background this time just to see how this looks in contrast to the thin line background. Then back and Save for Web, preview in the browser, and see what it looks like. So we can see this form of applying the matte color to the edge of your GIF works quite well if you've got the image, transparent image in front of a thin lined background and low contrast as well. But it doesn't work very well against thick lined backgrounds like the last example. So just be careful if you're going to use that, because it only works in certain situations. Okay, let's see how we can apply shadows and glows to this. So if we open the Transboard 3 file and the thin background GIF file, and in the Transboard 3 file, you'll notice that in the layers panel there's an FX icon beside the layer. If we click on the drop down menu, we can see the layer style that's been added to this, which is the drop shadow that's been added to the graphic, and it looks quite well in the Photoshop source file. If we just click on and off the white background layer to see the shadow better, and then what we're going to do is use the eyedropper tool to select the background color from the thin background GIF file, because we're going to use this in our preview window. Go to Save for Web then, and make sure you're on the surfboard image now, and Save for Web. Click on the flyout menu, choose Edit Output Settings, and then Background. We're going to click on the image radio button to make sure that our surfboard is shown in front of the background. And in the background image path, you can choose thin background GIF and leave color set to none. Go back to Save for Web and click Preview to see the shadow with the default settings. And it looks quite bad, to be honest. It's got jagged edges and it's not blending at all. This is with the default settings in Save for Web for the GIF. So go back to Save for Web and choose Matte and select a foreground color this time. So make sure it's the same blue as the background in our thin background GIF. Save the image in a new folder. You can call it shadow, and then make sure you've got HTML and images selected in the format menu, and finally open the file to preview it in your browser and see that the shadow only really works with thin line backgrounds. It works quite well in that situation, but it would not work with a thick line background and with high contrast colors. So it's ideal for thin lines and non-contrasting colors, but other than that it's a limited solution. And finally we're going to look at starting off with a non-transparent graphic. So if you open transport4.psd and just go to Save for Web and click on the eyedropper tool, click on the background color, go to your color table, select the color that we have selected, and then click on the transparent icon at the bottom of the color table panel. And what happens is that SaferWeb knocks out that color, makes it transparent. And you can do this to any color. It's very useful, obviously, if you're trying to get rid of a white background, um, except that if there's any white in the image itself, that would also be knocked out. It's fine in this situation. Um, in summary, then, we can say GIFs are great for transparency if you can use the tricks that we've looked at here to make the image blend into the background. However, PNG 24s are really suited best to this type of work if you can afford the extra file size that you're going to end up with.